I don't understand why everyone's bashing HR. We're just a corporate function, just like marketing or IT. And it's like,
no, we're not.
We're not, though. It's not about blaming HR. It's not about pointing the finger at HR and saying that HR needs to do better. It's about elevating the profession, protecting the people in it. And after all is said and done, she looks at me and she goes, now, Jonathan, do I have your commitment that you're going to go back to the office and be the best customer service rep?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I sure am.
How you drive engagement?
I think there's a message behind the message.
Mm-hmm.
Employees aren't literally expecting us to be their social bestie. Like, I guarantee employees aren't looking for their HRBP to be their HRBFF. They certify HR practitioners, and it's a really respected credential, but there's no enforceability behind it.
Yeah.
It's a voluntary credential. It's not regulated. We're supposed to be the people experts. We're supposed to be the experts around employment law, labor law, building effective organizations that make the best use of its human capital.
Welcome to the HR Misfits, the podcast about leadership decisions most organizations get wrong, told from the HR seat that actually sees the fallout. We're business-minded, human-centered, and just bold enough to challenge the people systems that no longer work, where polished playbooks end and real leadership begins. We're the HR leaders who've been in the room when things get messy, political, or uncomfortable, leading with heart, grit, and a little bit of sass. If you believe HR should be a catalyst, not corporate theater, and leadership should actually work for humans, you're in the right place. Let's get into it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the HR Misfits. We are thrilled to be back with you today. I'm actually really excited for this particular recording. This is the very first time that the HR Misfits have had a guest on the show. So I'm really excited for you to hear from him, about him, and just dive into this conversation. I'm going to kick it over to Marcy, who's going to really lead this conversation today, introduce our guest, and yeah, we'll go from there. Marcy.
Love it. Thanks, Amy. So we are very excited because we are a four boxer today, to use some HR lingo right out of the gate. Let's do it. So welcome to our four boxer. And we are very excited because we've been getting into a lot of conversations around many different topics. And I'm going to say it, guys, to circle back on.
Here we go.
I made myself cringe.
It's in the cringe graveyard. You cannot resurrect things.
I resurrected it. And here's why I resurrected it, for a good reason. So we're going to resurrect that to say we needed to circle back because we talked about a very important, albeit controversial topic with SHRM. And we talked about the public trust of HR. And do we feel that public trust is getting dangerously low? And I personally would say yes. And I feel the rest of the Misfits would say yes. And we had the honor of being contacted by somebody who is doing a really cool project, another controversial, insert evil fingers here, controversial type of topic around what is called the HR Accountability Project. And the big question is, should HR be licensed? Which we're going to get into today. So we have Jonathan, who I want to introduce himself. We're so happy to have you. Thank you. You're already an honorary misfit. We're giving you an honorary misfit title. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear, your HR villain origin story, because we all have one, as to how we ended up in HR, what made us, the HR misfit that we are. And we want to hear more about your project. So we're going to dive into that, talk about the why, the how, all the things. So I'm going to kick it over to you. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you so much, HR Misfits, for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I'm a huge fan, long-time listener, first-time caller, as they like to say.
We love that.
I think the first episode that I heard of yours, that it really resonated with me and made me think, I want to be a misfit too. You're talking about performance management and blowing up traditional performance management processes and 9 boxes, speaking about being in boxes, moving out of boxes. I just love the way that you look at traditional HR processes and challenging the status quo and the way that traditional HR thinks about employee engagement, performance management, and talent management, all these things that fit under the HR purview that might not be working so well and could take a second look. And I just love the way that you're doing that with this podcast. So thank you. I'm really excited and honored to be joining. As far as how I got into HR, my origin story, whether it's a superhero or a supervillain origin story, whichever way you want to look at it. I haven't always been in HR. So out of college, I worked in customer service roles. And at one company, I decided to go back to school and get my master's degree. And the capstone course in the program required us to identify a problem, an issue, a challenge at our employer and research it and recommend a suite of solutions. So I was looking at the issue of turnover for a specific subset of our employee population.
Good one.
And I contacted our HR department and said, hey, I'm wrapping up my master's degree. I'd love your help with thinking about how to best approach this. And they said, sure. So I talked to the HR manager, ran it by her, thinking about, turnover and all these other aspects of the employee experience. And she said, just send me the final written report, the final draft of it when you're all done. I said, okay, sure. That's reasonable. So I did some research, did some surveying of some of my teammates. And I put together the final draft and I sent it over to her. And she called me while I was on vacation, putting on the last finishing touches. And she said, you need to come into headquarters and meet with me because you can't submit this.
Oh.
So evidently I hadn't painted the company in a flattering enough light with my analysis and recommendations. So I show up at HR. And the HR manager is leading me into the office. And on the way, she grabs a box of tissues off the credenza. And I'm thinking,
Oh,
Where is
geez.
this going?
Where is this going?
Going to go, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
So she sits me down with my HR business partner, the two of them,
Oh, this is not
staring
good.
at me. And I just remember it so vividly. She's looking across the desk at me. She's got the hands folded and
Oh,
this
boy.
performative
Ew.
look of, concern on her face.
Ew.
Just, we're going to need you to pull everything out of this report about the company. You can't submit that. And I was just floored. I said, what am I supposed to do with 2 weeks left in my master's program to turn this in? And then the mask fell off and cold as ice, she goes, that's on you.
Oof.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, wow.
They threatened to fire me and sue me for violating the non-disclosure, non-disparagement agreements that I signed to work at the company.
Wow.
And then they forced me to give my professor's name and email address so they could contact him and make sure that I didn't turn in the paper, which they did after the fact. And then they tried to undermine my academic credibility to try to get me kicked out of the program. And after all was said and done, she looks at me and she goes, now, Jonathan, do I have your commitment that you're going to go back to the office and be the best customer service rep you
Oh,
can
sure.
be?
Absolutely.
Oh, I sure
How
am.
you drive engagement. Gonna knock it
So
out.
that was my first experience with human resources. I'd heard about,
Wow.
HR is kind of the company principal's office, but I never really worked with them directly. That right there was my origin story.
That's-
I decided I'm going to get into this field and I want to change it for the better. And that's what I
Yeah.
did. So
Real.
I spent some time consulting on my own. And then I eventually moved into an individual contributor role with a large insurance company. I built the employee experience function for the company from the ground up. I was an HR business partner for a while. So I did
Nice.
hiring and terminations, investigations and trainings and coaching and you name it. So it was an interesting experience because I kind of went behind enemy lines to see, all right, what's it really like working in HR?
Yes.
And I found that there are some really good, decent, passionate people who care about creating a great employee experience.
Right.
And I found that there are some people who fit the HR stereotype, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
That's right. Of course. Yeah.
That's where I'm at right now, is on a journey to make the HR profession the best that it can be. And we're in a really unique moment where that's kind of being called into question. That's what I'm here to talk about.
I love that.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so many things here that I get.
Yeah.
Number one, for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to call this HR manager. Let's just call her Sheila because it's just
Sheila.
it's like that's her name.
I like
It
that.
feels like her
I was
name
gonna
should be
say
Sheila.
Susan.
Susan could be one of those two. Susan
Close.
Sheila.
Damn it, Sheila.
Damn it,
Damn
Sheila.
it, Sheila.
So this is the type of HR story that just gives me just like makes my blood boil because I know that these type of HR leaders exist, and it
Yeah.
absolutely hurts the credibility of the role and the function when you take these types of approaches. And that's just like,
Yes.
I mean, kudos to you for coming out on the other side of it and saying, I'm going to get in here and go behind enemy lines and I'm going to fix it from the inside. Because a lot of people are just like, see, this is exactly why I hate HR.
Absolutely spot on, Latoya, because you can have two paths there. You can either say, absolutely not, and want nothing to do with this. Or what happened here, Jonathan, is this was your villain origin story, but you technically turned it into a superhero story because you said, I'm going to take this on because I know I can do this better and set the example. And that's the whole point, is that we need more people to set the example, to Latoya's point that, you know, this is not absolutely how we do things. Like we do care and we do want our function to be known for a function that has impact. And so it sounds like this is where you're now embarking on a journey. So you're in HR, but you're taking this to the next level to say, let's talk accountability.
Right, exactly. So this whole concept of accountability for HR, the impetus, it started back with a New York Times article. You probably read it. It came out a couple of years ago. So human resources is making you miserable.
Yes.
And the whole, the crux of the article was employees, I don't want to say hate, but they dislike and distrust HR, so they're miserable.
Strongly dislike
HR. But don't worry, because HR is miserable too, so everyone's miserable. And then the Sherm verdict came out late last year, and it just started or continued this conversation that I've been watching going on online about, you know, HR is not your friend.
Yes.
And we're really in a credibility crisis in our profession. And I have to say that I understand how HR can really want to fight back against the narrative that, you know, we're the enforcers or that we're against employees. But the defensiveness that I've seen anytime somebody posts HR is not your friend in the comments, you know, it's not helping our case. And it builds on that narrative that we can't be trusted. So I started thinking about, how can we change this direction? How can we pivot away from the perception that we aren't who we say we are? And that got me thinking about, maybe we need to be licensed, you know, and let me know if I'm getting ahead with kind of,
no, go for it. I love it.
SHRM, of course, is the premier professional organization for human resources across the world.
Supposed to be.
Certify HR.
Supposed to be, Jonathan.
Right.
Yes,
I'm probably treating them too nicely. But, you know, they certify HR practitioners, and it's a really respected credential. But there's no enforceability behind it.
Yes.
It's a voluntary credential. It's not regulated. And there's no guarantee that someone who has a SHRM SCP or a SHRM CP is a competent and ethical HR practitioner.
Yeah.
And if you think about the impact that we as a profession have on people, it goes above and beyond most other professions. You know, again, going back to the conversation that I'm seeing happening online when HR gets into the comments section, anytime somebody posts HR is not your friend, one of the more frustrating arguments that I see is, I don't understand why everyone's bashing HR. We're just a corporate function, just like marketing or IT. And it's like, no,
we're not.
We're not, though. You know, we have seriously impactful, confidential conversations that other corporate functions simply don't. You know, you don't see people going on TikTok to post about, don't trust IT. IT isn't your friend because it took 3 weeks to respond to my help desk ticket. Like, that's not a thing.
It's not, right?
You know, we have an impact on people's lives and livelihoods that other functions simply don't. And my argument is, we therefore have a greater responsibility to ensure that we're ethical and competent in practice. And one way that I'm suggesting we can ensure that is through professional licensure. Just like lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, they all have enforceable standards of conduct and ethics. Why not us? So that's the question that I'm posing and that I'm starting to ask and pose to not only our profession, but to legislators and attorneys and workers' rights groups, building this coalition to have this discussion. is it time to license and professionalize human resources?
So there's a lot here, and I love this because you can tell you have passion and energy around it. So I want to touch on a few things here. So first and foremost, would love to hear from the Misfits, because Jonathan, the way you're setting this up, I think is such a powerful and important conversation. So Misfits, want to hear from you. I want to start with HR is not your friend, because I think you touched on something there. Because when you say that sentence out loud, what do you immediately feel in terms of HR is not your friend? Like how did that land with the two of you?
You feel defensive, right? I mean, you feel you protective. I think it's for me, a combination of things. It's a combination of, I want to defend it. I want to protect it. But I also completely understand it, because it goes back to what, LaToya said earlier. We've all seen them. We've all witnessed, reported to, worked next to someone who is a Sheila, and
Yes.
I think that we've all experienced that. Yeah, right. So that's my first initial gut reaction. LaToya, what about yours?
So I probably am in a slightly different place. I understand the sentiment behind it. And so with that sentiment, I agree with you, Amy. However, I am not your friend. Just like we are not a family. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. We've said that before.
I am not your friend. And that is not my role. And I actually think that it is kind of in support of your position, Jonathan. Like, this is a profession. And just like other things, like, while I am a supportive leader of my team, we are not friends. Mm-hmm. There are the rare occasions where you meet friends at work, like Amy and Marcy, and that's different. But that's a totally different situation. But I need to be able to separate this. And we talked about this before, is like, there's like, that doesn't mean that I can't handle employees with care and compassion, but there's also the point where I've got to give tough feedback. I've got to coach without that kind of lens of like, the way I talk to my friends is going to be different than how I'm coaching a leader or an employee. And there are going to be some tough calls that are truly business decisions that I've got to put into place. And so with that, I don't want to be your friend. But at the same time, I do want to protect the profession. I don't want us to all come off as Sheilas. Right. And it is important that we understand the influence and the impact that we're having on the organization. So how you treat employees does set the tone for the organization, right? Like, HR does have a lot of impact and influence. And so I do feel like where it comes from, because that's usually a reaction to a Sheila type moment because they had a bad experience. And then I do want to protect that. But I also am like, I can't deny that I know that exists. And I think it is important to hold the function accountable for those types of experiences that people are having.
Right.
That's right.
I think those are very valid points. And so, Jonathan, from your perspective then, because when I hear that, I think there's a better way to say it, because it does come across defensive. But I do agree, LaToya, with you 100%, because it's true. We can't be your friend, right? We technically cannot, because we have a responsibility, professionally speaking, to uphold, these things that technically we can't really cross that barrier. We can't cross that line with you. So we do have to hold ourselves to those standards. However, I do feel a lot of the time, and Jonathan, this is where I'd love to hear from you, is we're not the best PR in HR. We sometimes do come across overly defensive, or in the case with SHRM, it's like, I do look at that institute, like, sorry, but that you should be holding yourself the highest possible standard, which means if you don't know how to articulate something, maybe take 5 minutes, go debrief with people, and then come back with your best statement. But to say immediately, well, HR is not your friend. It's like, yes, while that's true, perhaps there's a better way to state that, because what it does is it immediately then says, well, if we're not your friend, then public opinion can then be, well, then you're my enemy.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. And HR is definitely not your enemy. We are a people function, and there's a reason why so many of us get into this profession. Is because we care about people. And unfortunately, there are certain organizational and structural constraints that might tie our hands in certain situations.
Yes.
And that comes through as not the best experiences for employees. But going back to the HR is not your friend narrative, I think there's a message behind the message. Mm-hmm. Employees aren't literally expecting us to be their social bestie. Like I guarantee employees aren't looking for their HRBP to be their HRBFF.
I mean, I would disagree.
They're
I
saying
think people want me to be their bestie. So but
They want
that's
you to
just
be
me.
their
This is
BFF.
personal.
I mean, I would be
Just
too,
you,
but-
Latoya. We all want Latoya as a BFF. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but that's me. What they're saying to us when they say HR is not your friend is HR can't be trusted.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that's based on people's lived experience. It's based on, rumor and stereotype and, kind of an aura of, kind of nefarious conduct and perception around HR. But there's a reality to it too. The Sherm verdict, it wasn't a one-off. It was part of the pattern.
Yes.
So
Fair.
as I'm doing my research for this project, I'm looking for specific instances of HR misconduct, not where someone misunderstood or was unhappy with a legitimate business decision. It's where HR was either complicit in or caused harm to an employee.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now I have a running list of about 50 state and federal lawsuits, employment lawsuits.
Oh boy.
Where HR is implicated, again, as either complicit or directly causing harm. And it's things that range from, the traditional, somebody complains to HR and then all of a sudden they find out that they're on a PIP and they're being managed out,
Right.
to age discrimination, FLSA violations, and LRA violations. It's a pattern. It's a pattern, so it's a problem. EOC receives about 80,000-ish complaints every year, and about half of for retaliation.
Right.
Retaliation for internal complaints.
Yeah.
And who's handling those internal
Right.
complaints for the most part? We are.
HR. Yeah.
There was a case a couple of months ago in Ohio where a woman, she had a high-risk pregnancy. Her doctor said, look, you really should be working from home. So he wrote up a report, gave the note to her to give to HR. And HR refused to engage in the interactive process with her and said, nope, you either have to work in the office full time or you have to go on an unpaid leave.
Yeah, I read this case.
So she had to choose between her income or, the risk of losing her baby, which unfortunately she did. She ended up filing a wrongful death lawsuit against the company.
Wow.
And the jury handed her a $22 million verdict
Yeah,
against her
it was
employer.
huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
And she
So-
deserved it.
And she did.
Right.
These aren't isolated
It's
incidents.
terrible.
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
I think that's completely fair. And your study, I think you said it was like 1 in 4 trust HR. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it wasn't a study that I did, but it was a study that came out recently that 1 in 4 employees trust their HR department, meaning that if they go to their HR department with a complaint or a concern, they trust that it will be handled either confidentially or ethically or legally.
Yeah. 50,000 retaliation suits with the EEOC would support that, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And one of the things that I would say on the other side of this, there's probably 3 sides that I can think of. One is there's also with those like building on the number of lawsuits, the information that we have access to, the conversations that we're privy to. Again, we're not in a protected group of any sort. There's no protection for HR. So for the function, so while we should be held to a standard to support the organization, there's also no protection because you tell me something
Yeah.
and I will tell people, just to be clear, I am not a lawyer
Right.
or a psychiatrist. I am not like you telling me something to say, hey, Latoya, I just need you to keep this confidential. That is a personal ethical choice that I have to make. And most of the times I will do it. I tell people, if you tell me something that I feel like I need to report, I have no obligation to hold this. So before you start talking, I want you to understand that. I understand that most of my colleagues are probably not taking that position. And so you get in this space. And so, because a lot of people say, well, once I know this, like, what if the company decides I tell them this and they do nothing with it? Now I am also held liable to whatever the outcomes is. So maybe in this, but what if the HR person may have said something to someone in leadership and they said, nope, don't approve that. Then we sometimes get brought into the fold of the outcomes or any of the kind of actions that come out of that as like collateral damage. And there's no protection for you as an HR leader to say like, how do I protect, how are we protected when this types of things happens? And even if we don't agree with the direction of the, of the company, because we're really usually not the decision makers. We are just the ones that are advising or consulting on this particular topic.
And that's where I think I can make the best case for licensure when talking to HR professionals about this, because it's not about blaming HR. It's not about pointing the finger at HR and saying that HR needs to do better. I mean, some HR people need to do better.
Of course. Sheila. Come on, Sheila, do better.
It's about elevating the profession and protecting the people in it. Yeah. So we have professions like nurses or teachers who have mandatory reporter obligations attached to their professional licenses.
Right.
And, you can get into the policy rationale behind that because they're dealing with vulnerable populations like people who are elderly or children. But I mean, I'd argue that people in employment relationships are vulnerable given the power imbalance between employers and employees. Absolutely. So we, as kind of the stewards of ethical and legal business decisions in terms of workforce management, we should have that protection to, if we need to, report to an agency and say that something illegal is going on here and we should be protected from retaliation for doing that. Or just the fact that we have a license gives us some protection, because if you have a leader who's asking you as an HR professional to do something illegal or unethical, you then say, I'm not putting my license on the line for that. No.
Right.
Lawyers, the leader says, all right, fine, I'll find somebody else. Good luck with that, because then the next HR professional who comes in whose license is going to say, I'm not putting my license on the line for that.
That's right.
So a big part of this, I would argue, is protection for the people who really care the most about doing right by people in any organization, HR, but we have our hands tied, or we're just human and we have to watch out for our own income because we're accountable and beholden to leadership ourselves.
I think that's a good point too, because I think if anyone's taking a look at what you're trying to do, I think that's an important point to raise, is that you're also looking at this for the protection of HR as well. And it leads me at times to think about this. I mean, and misfits jump in, but I've had so many cases where employee relations, for example, I feel is a big one, where I've had people who, even though it wasn't my direct job as an HR business partner, as someone who technically needed to assist the business, I would get pulled into these cases a lot because I would be working with someone who I could tell would read maybe a handbook and then be responsible for these cases where, to your point, Jonathan, these are very delicate situations. These are situations, and I'll, without giving too much detail, I had a situation where I had a very high risk case where the employee relations contact that was working on it was only 2 months into the company. And so when the SHRM aspect happened, that was where my mind went. I said, but also shame on the company for putting somebody who's only had 2 months of training in that situation. But I remember stepping in that moment and saying that my direct title is not, I'm not the employee relations specialist, but I might as well have been in that moment, because I was watching how quickly this was going south, where this employee could have turned around and just sued our brains out, like literally had a case. I was watching it happen. And if I hadn't intervened and assisted in that moment, I knew we were putting ourselves at a big risk. And so when I think about that example, to your point, that is potentially where that protection can come in, because that individual was put in a position that, one, they probably shouldn't have been put in. 2 months of training, reading a handbook, I'm sorry, should not be handling a very high risk case.
Right.
And I had to do a lot of working with legal, a lot of working with the business leaders to bring that situation back to, maybe a slow burn versus a volcano. And so I love that point that you're making, because I think that's where a lot of people have questions, is what does that look like from the HR side? And then the question becomes, is it all of HR? Or is that an example of where maybe we should start when we think about who's representing the company in those moments and the employee, when you're talking about legal, psychological health? Like, this is where that conversation, I think, should probably go.
I think that So if we're talking about the scope of roles that should be included within licensure, of course, it would be those that handle those high impact, high stakes employment decisions like terminations, investigations, or even billing compensation plans. I would argue those kind of more tangential but still high stakes aspects of the employee experience that have a real effect on people's lives and livelihoods. But I want to be, in my approach to this project, co-creative in that I'm building, hopefully, toward better HR profession with other HR professionals. So it's not something that's being done to HR, it's being done with HR. What do we want licensure to look like, if we even want licensure at all? It's not unheard of for occupational licensure in general. I mean, that's a thing for many occupations that I would argue carry less impact on people's lives than HR does. I get so frustrated when I see, again, going back to the defensiveness, HR people will say, well, there's good and bad in HR just like there's good and bad in every other profession. No, not just like every other profession.
Right.
A bad landscaper doesn't have the same impact on someone's life that a bad HR person.
We do
does.
hate that,
A
by
bad
the way.
hairdresser.
Oh, that's
doesn't have the same
Jonathan,
kind of
that's
impact.
worse.
Just
A
don't have the
hairdresser.
same impact.
Yeah. Oh goodness.
I mean, maybe a bad hairdresser, but
And they are licensed. That's the thing.
Yes,
good
they are.
Right. All of those professions, the thing that they
Facts.
have in common is they require licensure.
Yes.
So why not the profession that we're supposed to be the people experts? We're supposed to be the experts around employment law, labor law, building effective organizations that make the best use of its human capital in legal and ethical ways.
Yeah.
Why not have minimum enforceable standards of conduct, competency, and ethics for that profession?
I love the direction. I'm definitely a huge supporter of this licensure. And I remember, because I still use this joke, probably not a good one, but I'd be like, I didn't go to like HR school. Jonathan, you actually went to HR school, clearly, and you've got a lot more credibility. But I kind of had to learn through things. I think the me and the misfits, we all kind of fell into HR. Like, this not where we started. This was, you were more intentional. But I think that's weird. But you also went out and said you were getting the credibility to go behind it. I kind of was like, fell into it. And then somewhere along the journey, I was like, oh, I should get a SHRM certification. I got a side eye about that now.
Yeah. Right.
But I
Right.
will
Right.
tell you, at the time of going through, before some of these things started to manifest, I said to myself, how it was so different from what I was experiencing in HR. Now this, I'm sure, has evolved, I hope. But I felt like, well, like, this feels very specific to SHRM. Like, I feel like this is not how HR is really being done. This is not what I'm seeing. It felt like I'm just checking the box, but I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it because it'll just make me feel. And I think that sometimes when people, especially since so many HR professionals have went through the SHRM certification program, and on the other end of it, it's like, hey, at the end of the day, did it really change how I practiced HR? Did it make me a better, more credible HR professional? My personal experience, no, it did not. My experiences, the people, the amazing mentors and coaches that I had along my career journey is what made that difference. But given that SHRM is probably not in the best situation right now, this might be a good opportunity to kind of think about what it truly should a governing body be for the function. Thinking about what does licensure look like and what is the real governing body and how to reshape this. Because again, never waste a crisis. I know, Marcy, I know you've heard, but never waste a good crisis. This might be an opportunity and a kind of like an entry point to say, this is the time. HR has changed drastically, even in all of our career. And I think that's one of the reasons it kind of got really big and different really quickly.
Yeah, it did.
But it's time to really think about that. And with all of the things that we see going on, then maybe this really creates the platform to really build on this and say, look, maybe things didn't work out so great with SHRM, clearly. Like, I think their time is up.
Yeah.
And maybe we take a different path and get behind Jonathan, the HR Accountability Project, and think about like, how can we really kind of shape the governing body and the credentials behind HR as a function?
Right. And that's a question for all of us in the profession. It's, what do we want our profession to look like going forward? If SHRM isn't the thing, I mean, I'm sure that they still will be around.
They love us
but
so much that we just can't wait for our invitation to the conference because we have so much to say.
I'm sure the HR misfits will be on their stage, right?
Absolutely.
Probably not.
Invites in the mail.
Yes.
But
Just keep waiting for that.
it's what best practices do we want to hold as the standard for our profession?
Yes.
If we want to pull from the SHRM body of knowledge, that's great. Or if we want to pull from HRCI or from the Center for HR Innovation, there are all these bodies out there that have some good ideas and some good standards. But there are also people out there who have really cool patchwork careers that they've built outside of HR, and then they made their way into HR, and they can bring that expertise into building a great HR career. So it's what we're going to make of it going forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I and LaToya, I love where you kind of took this conversation, because if I'm being totally honest, I didn't get my SHRM certification to gain more knowledge. I got my SHRM certification because every job posting I saw to get to the next level required it.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
that we know those times are changing, and not just in our profession, right? We see a shift in so many ways when we think about the future of work around upskilling, around is a college degree required? You know, I let my SHRM certification lapse many years ago. Why? Because I really learned as I moved into leadership. I'm not suggesting anybody does this. This is what I did. This is Amy. But for me, it was like, I was focused on the business. You know, you become a business person that happens to do HR. And I did not need a SHRM certification to do that. And I knew my next leadership role, I wouldn't need it either. There was a big change when you're moving into like that first line management role that would require the SHRM cert, right? Or then moving into executive leadership, where all of a sudden it became preferred. I'm like,
Right.
interesting,
Would change
It'd
up
be nice
there.
if you had it, but also we're never going to to really follow up. And that's another thing. Like, how many of us that have even hired or seen that in the job description have actually called or went through the process to validate that? So
Never.
literally anyone could just
Never.
be like, I got to, and again, ethically, I do not recommend that.
That's right.
Right.
But just to be
But
clear.
it's a fair point.
Yeah, I realized that along the way too. I was like, we don't have the governance and the rigor behind even the
That's right.
certification we put out there for it. Like, so that is just a thing. And I'm just like, I don't know that I can ever say, wow, like that HR manager that I hired, that SHRM certification really came through in their interview. Never. I can never point to that.
Right.
But there's good learnings from it, just like anything. I believe in always learning, but I think we've got to call it what it is. It's an opportunity to learn, just like any type of classes or coursework that you can get to develop yourself. But what you're talking about, Jonathan, is very different. It's about accountability. It's about understanding the impact of the decisions that you make and what they have on people's lives, and making sure that there is a credible governance process to not only protect the clients and the customers we work with, but also the function.
That's right.
And that is a very, very different way to think about licensure for the function and the credibility of the work we do.
And the individual practitioner, right? I think that's such an important point of the accountability project and licensure to begin with, is it protects, as you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, yes, the function, the client, the whatever, the employer, but us as individual practitioners, which is really important.
I would still say that, voluntary credentials, they have their place. They have value. I have my SPHR. I'll do my recertification credits every chance.
Good for you.
Get, and I'll listen to some.
Do that. Don't do what I do.
Whenever I have a chance. It's some cool content from some different thought leaders out in the HR space. And it's great. And the way I talk about licensure versus certification is licensure is the floor. You need to have that minimum standard. Certification can be whatever those organizations make of it. You can specialize in, a DEIA or any other function that is under the umbrella of HR management, and you can demonstrate specialization or advanced study in that particular field of HR. But you still have to have that minimum enforceable standard, and that's what I'm arguing for.
Yeah,
I love it.
So where do you take this from here, Jonathan? Because I think it's an amazing project, and I think the question then becomes, first I would love to hear how you're doing with it so far. What's been the traction? What are you getting in terms of feedback? And then what would be your ideal situation with this? What would an accomplishment look like to you as to where you're going to take this project?
So an accomplishment, well, the biggest would be getting a bill in front of a legislative body and saying, we, the HR profession, would like to be licensed, and we want to put into place the framework and standards to get that done, just like any other licensed occupation. That's very far down the road. I don't have any delusion that this is going to be a quick or easy venture. Right now, I'm in the coalition building phase, which is having conversations with amazing HR practitioners like you all, and just getting this idea out there and asking for feedback about it. Again, going back to my comment about being intentional of involving HR in this process and having it be co-creative, that is so important to me, that we make this concept into something that we own and that we believe in.
Right.
So that's what I'm doing. I'm having these conversations, going on podcasts.
I love that.
I'm reaching out to attorneys or workers' rights groups,
Nice.
other HR professionals. And the idea has been landing pretty well because,
Good.
the SHRM kerfuffle, it really left kind of a black mark on our profession.
Yeah,
it really
With
did.
them being the world's biggest professional organization for HR, it puts into question the whole concept of, what does excellence look like for us?
Yeah.
And I'm proposing a solution. I'm not saying it's the solution. I'm not saying it's a perfect or the best solution, but it's something that I think we could get behind if we put the right effort and the right thoughtfulness behind it. And that's what I'm doing. So hopefully
Amazing.
I'm continuing to build my coalition
Love
and
that.
have more conversations. I would love to have an HR summit at one point where it's just a bunch of HR practitioners
Nice.
getting together and talking about, what do we want the standards to be? What does the body of knowledge look like that's going to be the standard for our profession? And then move forward with turning that into a model bill that I'm going to present to the Massachusetts legislature. I'm based in Massachusetts. I feel very strongly that Massachusetts would be the best place to start, given our very progressive, worker forward legislative stance, and then just go from there, building out model legislation and sharing it across the country, and getting the word out there. This isn't, it's not entirely unheard of. Jamaica actually last year, they started an HR registry that's managed by the government, but it's actually administered by their professional services organization for HR. So it's not something that's just brand new out of the sky. It exists. It exists for other occupations.
Right.
I think it's time to talk about doing it for HR.
Yeah. I love this. First of all, you have our support, so we're 100% behind you. And this is what it means to be a misfit, is that we will take the road maybe less traveled, or we'll push back against, things that, maybe, this is always how we've done it. And it's like, well, maybe it's time that we don't do it that way anymore. And we be a little bit disruptive, and we look at the current state, and that's great that it may have worked here in the past. But what we're saying is today it no longer works, or today we're coming up against nuances that maybe should shift our mindset. Or perhaps we have people coming into the profession who are not fully trained or up to speed as to how to handle tough conversations. Perhaps we do need to be thinking differently when we're talking about psychological health in the workforce, or when you have an employee, that awful situation where that woman, lost her child, where you have these delicate situations to say, at some point, we have to make sure that we have protection in place, both for HR and for our workforce. Because, like it or not, if you are entering the HR function, you are basically saying that you do care about your product, which is people. So no, you are not IT. No, you are not marketing. You are not in the field selling a product. You are responsible for the people that are sitting around you every day. And no, we can't be your friend because we can't blur those lines, but we're not your enemy either. And there's a better way to drive these conversations and have these discussions where we can improve and we can be better and we can elevate one another. And I personally think this is how we do it, is we have these conversations, and we also ask that beautiful question, is how can we be better? What can we do to be better? And I think this is a great example. And I love that you're starting this. And maybe you start small. Perhaps it's a part of HR that you start with, sections of HR where you say, actually, this does make sense. We should have a license, and maybe we start in employee relations, or maybe we start in compensation. So you have our full support you're officially an honorary misfit.
Yes.
We want to be invited to the summit.
Yes.
For the honorary misfits.
Absolutely.
We'll start with you, Jonathan. We'll get some t-shirts.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
We're
I
going to
love
get the
that.
flag.
Yeah. I love this idea.
Take a size medium.
The bill signing.
Size medium. I love the idea of this summit. I think that's a great idea, right?
Amazing idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is.
Absolutely.
I envision like a future, Jonathan comes back on the show, I don't know, a year down the road or whatever, and gives us all the updates on what's happening and when the date of the summit is and how the coalition building is going. And by the way, real quick question before we wrap, Jonathan, I'm curious, is this experience with Sheila and then this desire to kind of start this accountability project, is that what led you to law school? Or were you already kind of doing that prior to this?
I've actually always thought about going to law school, even before, joining the workforce or going to college. I liked to pick apart problems and challenge things and ask the uncomfortable questions and come up with arguments. I just didn't have the opportunity to get there. And finally, I'm at a place where I can. And it nicely dovetails with this project that I'm working on with HR licensure.
Yeah.
Because, attorneys have a code of professional ethics, an enforceable code of professional ethics. So that's really great, learning for me as far as how that works and how it's enforced and what that looks like and how that might translate to the HR profession.
Yeah.
Well,
Great.
it sounds like you were born a misfit. Now you're officially part of this, and we put the misfit family behind you. And this work is just such a refreshing to see. And then you've put so much thought into it. So drop your, we'll make sure to include all of the links so people can check out the HR Accountability Project too. And they can go down, and see what you're doing, and we can kind of follow along with the journey. And I agree, like this is an invitation for an update, because I need to know how this is going and where I need to sign up at.
That's right.
Yes.
You got it. Thank you. Thank you so much for the support. And thank you again for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my idea and join such a really cool platform.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. We appreciate you. Everybody check out the HR Accountability Project with Jonathan. I have a feeling this is going to be going to get some legs to it. And you're right. It's not a quick fix, but what do they say, right? Like sometimes the best things are worth the wait. They take a lot of time to bake, and you're definitely doing all the right things. So thanks for coming on the show, Jonathan. We appreciate you. See you later, fellow misfits.
you.
Bye.